Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Juanita McCants. I go by Shespins on all the social media sites. And today I'm going to show you how I do the TIDAL Surge Poncho. I start off most of my video descriptions, titles with the term "with these hands," because that's just something my grandma always said to me. So the pattern was inspired by the two-color granny square created by Olga Poltava. I will be putting a link to her tutorial in the description box. You can go over to her channel, and if you aren't already a member of her channel, she puts out really nice videos, so you can subscribe to her. And you can subscribe to me if you aren't subscribed, if you find me through a YouTube search engine. And the materials you're going to use is you're going to need a dark colored background color. You're going to need a light color for your chains, or you could reverse it. You could do the light color and then do a dark color for your chains. It's up to you how you want your poncho to look, what colors you want to use. You don't just have to use two colors. You can change the colors of the chain stitch area or the granny stitch area. I did that with the blanket that I made that many of you have probably seen on several YouTube channels that I participate in, as well as my own video updates. And if you go to my Instagram, you can see pictures of all my projects that I work on. So you're going to need some scissors, cut your thread. You're going to need 2 stitch markers. Those are for beginners. Most people don't need the stitch markers, but it'll help you as you're doing your counting. You're going to need a darning needle, and you're going to need a pen and a piece of paper to take notes on. And because this is the notes that I took right here when I was trying to figure out what I was doing and how to do it. You can also, the size hook I'm going to be using is a J hook, and it's a Susan Bates. That's what I prefer. And the yarn I'm using is a worsted weight yarn. I'm going to be using this yellow as well as this purple. The yellow is Red Heart ombre, and the purple is Big Twist from Joann's in the lavender color, lilac or lavender, whichever one floats your boat. And I think that's pretty much everything we're going to need to get started. So let's get started. Alright, so this poncho is made with a 1x1 front post, back post rib. You don't have to do the ribbing. But it depends on what type of neck style you prefer for yourself. If you don't like turtlenecks or ribbing, then you can just do rows of double crochets or single crochets, however you want your neckline to look for your preference. I was making these for teddy bears, so that's why my sample is so small. But you can make this for an adult. And some of the numbers from just doing ponchos in the past, for a child, you get 68 stitches for the neckline, 88 stitches for a small adult, 98 stitches for an adult for the neckline. You can play with these numbers to make them whatever you want them to be. You can start with, to make it easy to divide into, you could just use the 70, the 90, the 100, the 110, 20, so on and so forth, 60, 5, 7, however whatever number of stitches chains. I'll be saying stitches because I knit and crochet. So if I say stitches, then I'm talking about the chains. So however, for starting your project, so however many chains you need to start your project, if you make it easily divisible by 2, it'll make it much more easy for you to place your stitch markers and to count out where you need to put your stitch markers. This is like the 4th or 5th attempt at doing this video, so I have already gotten some of my stuff done, but I'm going to go over it again with you in a different color, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Just give me a minute and I'll pick up some yarn for you guys. Alright, so I'm going to use some Just Cotton from Premier that I got from the dollar store, and some Premier Tweed just to get us started. Okay. Set this over to the side. Set this over to the side. Everything wants to move. So one of the things that I use when I'm crocheting or knitting or whatever is I have this graph book, and it has some cheat notes in it. But when I'm thinking of a pattern, I'll do like a quick basic sketch, and then I'll write down as I go, if I'm trying to come up with a pattern on my own, what I need to do. When I do fingerless gloves for people, like I did this several years ago for my friend Artie Dar on YouTube, I wrote down the basic information I needed to make her fingerless gloves that was crocheted. And so I just, like I did this cell phone cozy for a friend that liked owls. So you can just write down things in your little book just to keep track of your ideas, changes you made to a pattern, or a pattern that you created or designed. And it'll help you go back to that area if you want to do it again. So yeah, like I'll trace somebody's hands to try and do their fingerless gloves. I'll doodle in my book when I'm bored. So just a good way for you to keep track of what you're doing, changes you're making to a pattern, and changes in patterns that you're trying to come up with. So this is the pattern for the Tidal Surge over here on this side, and this is where I was trying to think of the stitch counts and stuff to make it for different size people. So if you don't have a book, you don't have to use a GraphGAN book. You can use just a notebook paper and save it. However you want to do your notes, I suggest you do that. And this is where I'm working on my flax, where I'm counting down where I'm doing the sleeves to keep track of what I did, so that when I do the second sleeve, I'll have those instructions in my book. So that's one thing that I suggest for anyone, is to keep either a notebook, a tablet, paper. You can use loose paper, copy paper, and keep it binded up, or create some type of binder system for it, put in a folder. But that way you'll always have your notes when you need them, if you have to revisit that project, if you put the project down for a while. And the other thing I suggest is, if you are going to put the project down for a while, get some index cards and write down your needle size, your hook or needle size, the yarn you're using, where you got the yarn from. Write down the lot number of the yarn, because they stopped selling yarn. They will stop selling yarn. I guarantee you will have a project at some point, if not already, where the company stopped selling the yarn, and by the time you pick that project up, there is none left in the stores. And then you have to go and start searching around, trying to see if you can find that yarn, find a similar yarn, so that you can continue that project or finish that project. Or you might have to scrap it because you just can't get any, and it's just not worth the headache. You can scrap it and just redo it with another yarn. Or if you can find a complementary color that you can use, if it's in a place in the project where you can pull back or go and have enough to get to a place where you can pick a color that's complementary to the color you're using. For instance, if you have this gray right here, and you look on your color chart, and you can try and find a color that's comparable to that gray. So let's see. And you can just use your color wheel and just look and find a color that's kind of similar to your gray. Like for this gray, I would go with this one right here. And you can just play with your color wheel to see, well, now this gray and that yellow green looks good together. Not so much with that, with the blue green. So you can see that that gray looks nice with the secondary colors. You can just play around with your color wheel and try and find, like the one that's immediately across from each other, they always pop each other. So you could try and figure it out that way as well. So that's just some ideas for you to figure out yarn if you don't have any more in your stash. So, but let's get started. I'll be here all day talking to y'all about stuff like that. So this project, for what I did was I started off with 40 chains and then I added 3 chains. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to do 40 chains and then we're going to add 3 chains. I like having a longer tail because when I'm dealing with a pattern where you have to join it in the round, I sew my round together. So I make sure it's always that it's not twisted. So we're going to do 40 chains. That's 5, 6, 7. And I'll be right back when I get to 40. Okay, so now we have our 40 chains plus 3. And so I'm going to show you guys what I'm going to be doing with this. I am going to be going through the back loops of the chain, starting chain. And you guys can see that if it focuses. You have a little bump on the back of each of your chains. We're going to be going through those bumps because what it does is it creates a very nice edge. You're going to have a flat edge just like the front of your chain. Okay, so you'll basically be able to mimic each side of the double crochet by going through those back loops. It's going to make a real nice edge on your project. So we're going to start with our double crochets and we're going to go all the way across because like I said, I'm going to sew my end together to make sure that my project isn't twisted, because I do not like starting a project and then find out later that I twisted it. So this is our first bump, so that's our first chain. We're going to skip 3, skip 2 and go to the third basically. So that's 1, that's 2, and this is your third. So in that third chain from the hook, we're going to do a double crochet. We're going to yarn over, we're going to go through that back bump, we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to yarn over, go through 2, and yarn over, go through 2, and that is your first double crochet. And we're going to do that all the way. Excuse the sound of the dog or stomping down the stairs. I live with my family. And we're going to do this for each chain. We're going to go through that back loop. Okay? So if you are a beginner crocheter and you do not know what I'm talking about, I can recommend YouTube channels Bob Wilson 123, who is now Crochet with Claire, I believe. Mikey's, which is the Crochet Crowd. The One Virtuous Woman, OVW. Jada with Stitches. Those are some of the channels that I would recommend for a beginning crocheters. Okay, so we're going to pause right here. I'm going to finish these chains and then we're going to count. Okay, so we're back and we have our 40 double crochets. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to count till we find our 20th double crochet, and when we find our 20th double crochet, we're going to put a stitch marker in the top of that stitch. So what I wanted to show you guys was how the edges look on the top of the stitch. This is the top of the double crochets, and then this is the bottom. When we went into that back loop, they look identical. So they'll make a nice edge on your project. So we're going to count, and we're going to start at our end and count over 20 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is our 20th stitch right here. So we're going to just put a stitch marker in the top of that stitch. And this represents our back shell stitch. Will be placed here. So let's count to make sure we have 20 going this way. And 20. Okay. And so this is going to be where you are going to be putting your first shell stitch. So let's go ahead and put a marker right there to let us know that is where our first shell stitch is going to go. Okay, now we're going to join our work into the circle called joining around. Some of you would have already done this with your chain, but this is the way I like to do it to make sure that my project is not twisted. There it is. I like these needles with the little loop on the end of them. They are awesome. Okay. So what you need to do is you just take and place these up against each other. And you see you have the bottom of your stitch right here. Your double crochet, you have the bottom of the stitch right there. You want to go through both of those loops on the bottom. And both of these loops on the bottom. Okay, and you're just going to gently pull it through. You don't want to do it real tight. You just want to do like a little gentle tug so it looks like a normal size stitch, like the stitches you're working with. And then you're going to do the whip stitch, which is you're just going to go up under. We're going to go up, well, we'll go up on the one of the loops on that side and one of the loops on this side, and you just gently pull those together. You don't want it under a lot of tension because you don't want it to look like it's under a lot of tension. We're going to do that again. And now we're at the top. We want to find our yarn, make sure it's not in the way. And you want to make sure you do not split your working yarn or it's going to be hard to work through. I'm just going to do that one more time. Just gently pull it together. Okay, and then when you open it up, it's joined. It's not like this great giant obvious because you didn't pull your stitches tight. It just looks like there's another little weird stitch there. Alright, you can snip this yarn shorter or you could just let it hang around. I'm just going to pull my needle out for that and set it to the side. If you don't want it getting in your way, then just snip it off shorter, but still leave enough that you can weave in later on. This just lets you know that, hey, I'm at the beginning of my round again when you see that tail. Alright, so let's pick up our hook. And now we're going to start our front post, back post ribbing. Now you could do this ribbing front post, back post, or you could do it just front post. So I'm going to chain up 3. You can chain up 2. Depends on how you like doing your chain ups. But I'm going to chain up 3. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to go behind this first post, and that's my front post, and I'm going to do a double crochet. And then I'm going to take and yarn over, and I'm going to go in front of the next post and create my back post, double crochet. And we're going to do that all the way around. We're going to go front post, back post, double crochet all the way around to create our first row of ribbing. And I'll meet you guys back at the end. Okay, so I've reached the point where I'm doing my ribbing, my front post, back post, as you can see. And I've got to my stitch marker. You can go ahead and make your stitch there and then move your stitch marker if you want to move it up. Or you could just, this stitch marker just lets you know this is my midpoint. So you can make your stitch. That was the back post. So this is a front post. And then move your stitch marker up. That way it stays on top of your midway mark. I'm going to do the next stitch, front and back. So now that stitch is formed, and we can put our stitch marker over the top of that stitch. This just lets us know this is where your midway marker is. Okay? Let's continue to the end. Okay, so now we're gonna join with a slip stitch to the top of our first double crochet, which is right here. If you want your rib neckline to be longer, then by all means do a couple more rows of the front post double post. So you basically just join with the top of your first stitch, chain up 3 or 2, yarn over, and do front post and the front post and back post and the back post, and that's how you do another row of the rib neckline. Okay, so what we're going to do though, we're getting ready to start our actual project. So we're going to take this marker out here because we don't need it there anymore. We're going to set it to the side for when we need it. And we've chained up 2. We're going to chain up 1 more for 3. And we're going to yarn over, and we're going to go through this stitch. If you can see, there's a hole at the bottom of that stitch. You want to go through that hole and form your first shell. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to go through that hole, and we're going to do 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, chain 2, yarn over, and then we're going to do 3 double crochet in that same stitch, that same area beneath that first chain 3, and that forms your shell. Okay, 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet forms your shell, which is your point, one of your points for your poncho. I use chain 2 because I don't want my point to be growing faster than my size, to the point where it's like a skinny poncho, because that weight pulls on those stitches, on these loops, and it pulls it out like that. And so it hangs down further than if you do 3, it hangs down further, faster. And you don't want that in your, I don't want that in my poncho. If that's a look that you like, then that's your prerogative. But I don't like that look in my ponchos. So I do 2. I also do that for when I make granny square blankets. To keep my blanket squared up. I don't get that weird saggy look, that C shape, inverted C shape in my blankets, because the sides are going out wider than, like an hourglass shape. And the sides are going out wider because you have 3 stitches in between those points, so it makes it more stretchy. Alright, so now what we're going to do, since we have our first shell, we're going to skip 2 and we're going to do, so we're going to skip this front post, we're going to skip this back post, and that space beside that back post before your next front post, we're going to put a granny stitch, which is 3 double crochet. We're not going to do a chain 1 because we don't want that extra space in our poncho. If you like extra wide spaces in your ponchos, if you're doing this for a summer spring type poncho, then by all means you can add the 1. I do not add the 1 because it's not necessary, not for me anyway. So we're going to go into that space and we're going to do 3 double crochet. 1, 2, 3. We're going to skip 2, so that's 1, 2. So we're going to skip 2. We're going to go into that next space and we're going to do 3 double crochet. Skip 2 stitches, 3 double crochet. Skip 2 stitches, 3 double crochet. And we're going to do this until we get to our marker, and I will skip 1, skip 2, do that with you this time. If you're doing a larger poncho, it's going to take you longer, so just pause me and get to your marker. Skip 1, skip 2. Skip 1, skip 2. Skip 1, skip 2. Okay, so now we've reached our marker stitch right here, and what we're going to do in that marker stitch is we're going to make our next shell stitch. So let's take that off. Okay, so this was your last 3 double crochet, and then this was your marker stitch. So this is where we're going to put our next shell, which is going to be 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. Before you move, take your stitch marker, put it back in that chain 2 space, so that when you come to this stitch marker, you know it's time to make a shell. Okay? And so now we're going to, since we did a stitch here, we're going to skip 2, skip 1, skip 2, and in that next space, we're going to do 3 double crochet. And we're going to continue that all the way around. Skip 1, skip 2, granny stitch. The 3 double crochet is the granny stitch. Skip 1, skip 2, granny stitch. This yarn from the dollar store, this Premier yarn, is beautiful yarn. It just feels so freaking good and fluffy and bouncy, and it's warm. So if you get a chance to get some from your dollar store, just to sample the Premier yarn, and show you what their products are like. So let's get to, let me do our last granny stitch right here. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a slip stitch to join to our beginning shell stitch. So some people go into the top of the stitch, and that's fine. You can pull your stitch up and you chain up 3. So you count up 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you can finagle your needle through those 2 chains at the top. Sometimes they're a little hard to get through. If you can't get through them, it's just go under the stitch, pull up the yarn, do your slip stitch. The crochet police don't care. I don't care. you're making a garment. It's not got to be perfect. And if you can't get through those 2 stitches because it's a little tight, then the next time you do your shell, make sure that you don't pull those stitches tight, that you make sure that first stitch is a little on the loose, a little bit larger than the other, so it makes it easier for you to get through there. So now we're going to slip stitch across these 2 double crochet till we get to our center stitch right here. So you just go under the 2 loops of the double crochet, slip under and pull through, go under, yarn over, slip through that stitch, and then we got to our chain 2 space. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to slip stitch into your chain 2 space. Now what I want you to do is I want you to pull your yarn about that far, is about 3 inches, 3 to 4 inches. Pull your yarn, your loop, and now you're going to take this stitch marker that's on your chain 2 space to mark your shell stitch, and you're going to put it on that loop. The reason you're doing that is so you don't lose your loop while you're doing your chain 3s. So you put it there, and then you don't lose your stitch. You can use this for any project you're working on. Get one of these lock and stitch markers if you're working on a blanket or whatever you're working on. And that's how you can keep your stitches from coming apart when you put your work down. We all have someone in our life. Most of us have someone in our lives. Some of us live alone, and that's fine. But you might have a pet. Things happen, and somehow our stuff gets unraveled. Even if it's in a bag, somehow, somewhere, the gnomes of the world get into your bag, and somehow your stuff gets unraveled. If you put a lock and stitch marker on that work, unless this stitch marker gets broken, it's not gonna come apart. Your dog can tug on it, your cat can tug on it, your little humans in your house can tug on it, but it's gonna save your area. It's gonna save your stitches, keep you from having to rework stuff. So just pull it down for a little bit, and like that. And then we're gonna go and we're gonna pick up our second color. So this yarn, as you can see, is not as bulky as the yarn that I'm using for the background color, and my main color is the gray. If you don't like that, then you can choose a different yarn. We can do that, because I want to have similar results. So let me look real quick. I have some black. Oh, about to spill my water, y'all. So we're going to use this black yarn for our contrast color, so that our stitches will be similar all the way along. And if I remember correctly, this is some of the Michael's Color Smart yarn, some of the old Color Smart yarn. So what I want you to do is I want you to make a slip knot. Leave a little bit of a tail so that you can weave it in easier later. So make a slip knot. And I want you to take, what I do with my hook. Oh. And I want you to take and I want you to count back from your shell stitch 2 granny stitches. So that's 1 granny stitch, and that's the second granny stitch. And in the space behind that second granny stitch, I want you to go in and do a slip knot. So you're going to yarn over, pull it through, and then you're going to pull it through that loop that was on your hook and form a slip stitch right there. And this slip stitch is going to be where areas where you're going to be joining your rounds. So it's going to form like a line going through your work, but it's just a design element, really. It's not really going to, you know, break the bank. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 3 from that line. So that's 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to go into this first loop right here between our granny stitches, the space between each double crochet. We're going to go into that space and we're going to do a single crochet. Okay, some people do a slip stitch in that space. I do a single crochet because I like the way that looks better. Then we're going to chain 3. We're going to go into the next space in our granny stitch and we're going to do a single crochet. Okay, and we're going to chain 3, and then we're going to skip over this gap between the granny stitches. We're going to skip that gap and we're going to go into between the next double crochet in our granny stitch. So you see you have your granny stitch with the 3 double crochets. You're going to always go between the double crochet spaces, not the space between the granny stitches. Okay, so you're going to skip those spaces. So we're going to go into that stitch and we're going to do a single crochet. Chain 3. Go into the next stitch space between and that granny stitch. Do your single crochet. Chain 3. And now we're working on the shell. Okay, so when you're working on the shell, you want to make sure that your working yarn is out of the way. So just move it over to the side, out of your way. And it's the same thing. You want to go in between those granny stitches and do your single crochet. Chain 3. Go in between your next granny stitch. Do your single crochet. Chain 3. Make sure that your working yarn is out of the way. 1, 2, 3. And make sure that your working yarn in the back is out of the way because you don't want to trap that. And then we're going to skip the chain 2 space on our shell. And we're going to go into between the granny stitch on the next part of the shell. Your shell is basically 3 granny stitches, chain 2, 3 granny stitches, you know. Chain 3, go into that next one, and that's what you're going to do all the way around. And what happens when you go across your chain 2 space, it's like a flatter, like you can see how it's the chain 3s, it's like a hump, flat, flat, but it goes at like an angle like that. But that's the place you're going to be putting your granny stitches in the next round. Those flat areas. So you're going to do this all the way around, guys, until you get to your next shell. We're going to do I'll go with you to the next shell. And then you can finish up to the end point, and then that's where we'll come back again after this shell. So chain 3. Go into the space, chain 3, skip the space between the granny stitches, go into that double crochet of the granny stitch, chain 3, go into your shell, chain 3, skip the space between the granny stitches, go into your half shell, chain 3. And we're going to do that all the way around to our stitch marker. So I'm going to put you guys on pause for a second. We'll come back at the stitch marker. Okay, guys, we are at our other stitch marker, and I've already gone into the right side of the shell that forms our point, our shell stitch. And remember, we're going to go across the chain 2 space into that stitch on the side, up under there, to do our next chain 3. And you're just going to do this all the way across until you get back to your beginning shell stitch, which is on the other side. We're going to continue until we get back to this spot right here where we started our chain 3s. So I'm going to put you guys on pause again. Okay, so we are back in the area where we joined our black yarn to the project. And as you can see, this is the last granny stitch we worked right here. That last space between the double crochets. And then this was the space between this granny stitch and this granny stitch where we joined our black yarn. What we're going to do is, because we did a chain 3 up, we are going to go into the base of that stitch to join a slip stitch there. We're going to go into, is that how I did it? Let me think, y'all. I want to make sure I ain't telling y'all wrong. Yeah, we're going to go into the base of that stitch, yarn over, pull through, and do a slip stitch. Okay? And that's going to join that round of chain 3 spaces to our work. So now it's joined. So what you want to do now is you want to take and you want to pull that yarn down and then add your stitch marker to keep that yarn from moving. We're going to add our stitch marker back. So we got that stitch marker, got this stitch marker marking our point. So we need another stitch marker. Let's use this one. So we're going to use this stitch marker to keep that yarn from moving. And the reason why I go 2 stitches away from my points or my shell stitches is because I don't want these yarns constantly interfering with each other, being in my way. When I did the blanket, I found that being so close to doing it right beside the shell stitch, the yarns have a chance to cross, get pinned down by your other yarn. But having it a little ways away from that shell stitch made it a lot easier to work on that project. So, okay, so we're going to start with our gray yarn again. So we're going to take off our stitch marker, okay? Go ahead and put your hook into that stitch. Now, mind you, remember, we are inside of our chain 2 space. But now you see we have this black yarn also going across our chain 2 space. We have this yarn and so we got to go over both of these yarns. And remember I told you how, I know it might be a little bit harder to see with the black yarn, but the areas where that are between our granny stitches, that's the area where we're going to be putting our next granny stitch. But you're going to be locking down the black chain 3 and your gray yarn that's between your granny stitches. That is flatter. It doesn't look the same as the yarn that's going into your actual granny stitch. So we're going to lock these down. We're going to do a chain 3. And we're going to yarn over and do our regular shell in that stitch. Chain 2. Let me make this back smaller. Here, I'll pull it out and then just show you guys again. Alright, so this was our beginning chain. Just going to pull that yarn down. And we're going to go ahead and yarn over and pull through. And see it's going across the black yarn and the gray yarn in that chain 2 space. We're going to chain up 2 because we just did that one. Yarn over, go under, and we're going to do 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. 3 double crochet for our other half of our shell. And that's where it was. Okay, and so that forms your granny stitch over black yarn, trapping that black yarn. There it is. And so this is where we are on our pattern. You just made this your first one, this area right here. You see. So you just made this section right here. Alright, and so now each of the flat areas, which is the spaces between our granny stitches. So this is the end, this is a granny stitch right here. These flat areas is where you want to make your next granny stitch. So you're going to yarn over and go under into that granny stitch. And you're going to trap your black yarn and you're going to trap the gray yarn, because you're going around those two chain areas. See? And then you see the next flat one is right here, which is between two granny stitches. And that's where you're going to be putting, I got my armrest right here, because this edge of this disc is killing me. And so you're going to do that all the way around. Find your next space, which is right here. And I'm sorry if it's hard for y'all to see that, but see if that helps any. Your next space between your granny stitches, you want to go down up under there and around, trapping the gray and the black together. And the stitch is going to be kind of stretched out. You want to do that so that your work will lay flat. You don't want to pull that tight, because if you pull it tight, then it's going to make your work curl. So if it's going to be stretched out, let it be stretched out. It's supposed to be stretched out. Those loops are supposed to be stretched out between each of the granny stitches, because you're going across, you know, several stitches to get to the next area where you're going to put a granny stitch. So you want that chain to be stretched out like that. Trying to do slow-mo for y'all. Some more yarn. So I'm going to bring this up closer so you guys can see. See, like this is a granny stitch right here. It's the space between the granny stitches that I'm going under. And you can see how the chains that are inside the granny stitch, how it's got like this hump over it. You don't want to go under the humps. You always want to go over the space between the granny stitches. Okay? And that's how you do it. You go over that space. See how it stretches out, that stitch? and keeps the work nice and even and not puckering or pulling. And that's how you're going to do that. You want that stitch to stay stretched out and relaxed because it's going across several areas. You don't want it to be tight, because if you do that, it's going to be wavy and pucker. And you want to try and do this with the same tension. So just relax your shoulders, and just let what will be. Don't try to force control over it. Just go ahead and do what you got to do. All right, so now we're coming to our center point. We know we're coming to our center point because our stitch marker is there. So that tells me that in this space, let's go ahead and pop our stitch marker off, I have to put another shell stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go under that loop, yarn over, and I'm going to do a shell. So it's going to be 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. Okay, and then you're going to put your stitch marker back into that chain 2 space, so you know after you do your next round of the chain 3s that this is my shell up under there. That's my chain 3 space, my chain 2 space up under there. See, you can see right here what I mean. Like you got the hump here, you got the chain. It's almost like you know, the chain 2 space, and then the space between the granny down here. So you're going to yarn over, you're going to go into your space and do your 3 double crochet. Alright, and I'll meet you guys back around to the other side, and you can see over here how our pattern is forming. You can kind of stretch it out to move those loops where you want them at. Just pull your project a little bit. Okay, once it gets some weight on it, it'll pull itself down like that. So, and you can do this with a textured yarn, so you can get different you know, different feels. Like you can use a textured yarn and it'll be like, you know, poofy. You can use a yarn that has some halo on it for the chains, and it'll just add some more interest and texture and color to your project. And you can also use your team colors. So if you're a Green Bay fan, you could use your green and white, green and gold, green, white, and gold. You could use the sport yarn to do your chains. That yarn at Red Heart and some of the other Hershers has some team yarn, team spirit yarns. So you could use those team spirit yarns to for the chains area, and use the solid color, you know, and do your team poncho that way. I mean, it's like, you know, you can do so much with this pattern, just to give it different looks, different textures, and just have fun with it. But that pretty much is the TIDAL Surge poncho, guys. It's very easy. It's not hard. You're just doing double crochets and single crochets and the chain stitch to get started. Alright, so now we have, okay, that's my spot. So I told y'all how that got pulled on my black yarn, but this stitch marker kept that yarn from moving. from pulling apart. So this is the area where we got our join, and it's the area that is between 2 double crochets. So we're going to put our double crochet granny stitch in there, because that's where it's supposed to be, but we're going to make sure that we don't cross over. Let's see, we did good. So we're going to make sure we don't lock down our working yarn. So it's going to be kind of to the side of that working yarn. Okay, make sure you don't trap your working yarn. Move it out your way, and then we're going to go over to our next space between the granny stitches, which is right here. And then we want want to check before we go any further to make sure we didn't accidentally, and we didn't, trap our yarn underneath the gray yarn. Okay, and so now we're at our last space, and we got to join our yarn. So you're just going to go over here to your shell, because we're at our first shell, and you're just going to go up under that first space and do your slip stitch, just like that, and both sides match. And that is the pattern, guys. You just slip stitch over to your chain 2 space of that shell stitch, pull your yarn through that chain 2 space, put your stitch marker back up there so your yarn doesn't get pulled loose, and then you would do your next row of chain 3s. And that is the TIDAL Surge Poncho. It has so many things that you can do with this pattern, as far as different yarns you can use, different textures you can use, and that's it. This yarn is bulkier than the yarn I use for the sample, but as you can see, if you look at it, it's a little bit bigger because this yarn is bulkier. You can tuck your little side, you can decide which side of this poncho you're going to use, but once you block it out and flatten everything out, and when it gets some weight on it, these things are flattened out on their own, like you can see, like this one did right here. And so it's a very pretty poncho. I'm going to be making a child size one for my granddaughter Luna, who many of you have met. And I hope that you guys, if you have any questions, you can contact me on YouTube. You can contact me using my let's see if I can, it'll let me do it while let me pause it real quick. Okay, guys, so you can contact me. You can see it on the screen. YouTube at shespins.com with any questions, or you can comment in the comment section below the video. I hope you guys can use this pattern to make something. If you do make something, then you can go over to my my Facebook or my Instagram. Probably my Instagram will be the easiest place to go, guys. And it's gonna be Shespins. Shespins all over the place. So you can go to my Facebook. You can look up Shespins on Facebook. You can look up Shespins on Instagram, Twitter. I think is Shespins1. And you guys can find me on social media that way. Ravelry, I'm Shespins on Ravelry. And contact me to ask me if you have any questions or anything like that. So y'all take care, and thank you for watching my video.